Hi, it's John Adams, and I'm the Public Crusader. Going to have a puzzle for you today. If you can figure it out, maybe I'll give you a prize. There's a great paradox happening inside the federal parliament that's left a lot of smart people scratching their heads. They can't figure out what's really going on. As you would know, for the last 6 months, I've been on a massive campaign against the Australian Securities and Investments Commission. ASIC's performance over the last 15 years has been absolutely woeful. Most of that performance happened under the coalition, i.e., the Abbott, Turnbull, and Morrison governments. And yet, since the federal election of last year, which happened in May, there's been two massive votes in the Australian Senate in relation to ASIC. And on both of those occasions, every single political party in the Australian Senate, including the independents, voted against ASIC except for one political party, and that is the Australian Labor Party and the Albanese Government. So the real big question that people have to ask is, why is Labor protecting ASIC for things that ASIC did before the last election, before Labor came to power? There's a lot of smart people who are closely observing what's happening inside the Senate, and they can't figure it out because politics and political instinct would suggest that the government should be blaming the coalition for things that ASIC did before the last election. And yet, the biggest supporters that ASIC has in the parliament is the current government, the Albanese government, and the Labor Party. And to a lot of people, that makes no sense. But also, what even is more profound is that since the last election, who has been the lead attack dog against ASIC? The coalition, including Senator Bragg. So why is it that the coalition, who was responsible for ASIC, are now attacking ASIC for things that happened under the coalition, and Labor is defending ASIC for things that happened when they were in opposition? That is the big, profound question. And one would suggest is maybe Labor is trying to protect someone or something. So that's the question of today's show. Who are they protecting? The relationship between ASIC and the Albanese government is a very fascinating puzzle. And dare I say, maybe we'll see some political scientists or some journalists write some interesting articles about it. But I'm just going to go through a couple of slides with you today just to illustrate the point. Now, just so we can set the context and the time frame, because I'm going to show you a couple of things which is going to really open your mind up to maybe something that is fascinating happening inside federal politics. So last August, I went to Parliament. I met Labor senators and coalition senators and One Nation senators. I met the UAP. I met some of the staff for the Greens. It didn't matter where I went inside the federal parliament. Everyone had universal concern about ASIC, and everyone said that they wanted to do something to fix it. So I was encouraged by that. So I told them I was working on a report, and the report would come out shortly thereafter, and I'd be calling for an inquiry. So lo and behold, on the 6th of October, I published the first of my two-part report into ASIC's performance, and I showed that ASIC, according to their own data, has gone backwards in terms of their willingness to investigate reports of alleged misconduct. And I wanted an inquiry. So I thought, given that I had spoken to all these senators back in August, that the prospects of an inquiry were quite strong because everyone was giving me the right signals. But then all of a sudden, after I received media publicity in both the ABC and news.com, something different happened. The Labor Party changed their mind. And if you look at your screen, you're going to see that I received a letter on the 13th of October, 2022, from Senator Deborah O'Neill, basically saying that she welcomes my report, but she doesn't support a separate inquiry happening at the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Corporations and Financial Services. So there's a particular quote that's really critical in this letter. So if you can look at your screen, this is the critical quote. Quote, I note your calls for a committee investigation into ASIC. The committee already conducts regular scrutiny of ASIC through our quarterly oversight hearings, and I believe that an additional inquiry would be a duplication of committee processes. Well, I can say two things about this particular letter and this particular paragraph. The first off is that this position that Senator O'Neill expressed in October was quite different to the position she expressed in August. So I was quite surprised when I received this letter. In terms of the second thing that I would say is that it is true that the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Corporations and Financial Services holds a particular hearing into ASIC every 3 months. But in those hearings, you only get to hear from ASIC. You don't get to hear from the public. You don't get to hear the other side of the story. And that's why a standalone inquiry was critical, because the public and experts and academics and various stakeholders need to have the opportunity to tell Parliament their version of events. Because when it comes to white collar crime, there are victims, there are observers who have a completely different view to what the boffins at ASIC have consistently told Parliament. And can I say we are up to submission number 37 in terms of the current inquiry, which is being run by Senator Bragg at the Senate Economic References Committee, and the horror stories are already rolling out. We are already seeing stories of where victims of white-collar crime basically have lost their life savings and have gone through tremendous emotional and mental anguish because ASIC failed to go after the crooks. So, and what I would say is that if you haven't had the opportunity to look at these submissions, go onto the current inquiry webpage and read them. They make for very sobering reading, and I actually got quite emotional when I read number 37 last night, because it is a absolutely heartbreaking story. But I'm going to go back to the puzzle. So here we have, I issue a report on the 6th of October. I get national press coverage by the ABC and News.com. And then a week later, Senator O'Neill says, thanks for your report, but we're not interested in having an inquiry. But then on the 27th of October, what happened? Senator Bragg moved the motion inside the Australian Senate and basically said he wants to have an inquiry, a separate standalone inquiry into ASIC using his committee, which is the Senate Economics References Committee, which is a different committee to Senator O'Neill. So if you look at your screen, what you're going to see is the motion that Senator Bragg moved on the 27th of October, 2022, calling for the current inquiry, which is the inquiry via his committee into ASIC. And what happened when this vote went, what happened with this motion when it went to a vote? The motion was passed 43 to 20. Every single person inside the Senate, except for Labor, voted for the inquiry. So Coalition Greens, One Nation, UAP, Jackie Lambie's party, and the independent David Pocock, they all said, we want a separate investigation into ASIC and ASIC's performance. And this performance was the performance that happened before the 2022 election. Things that happened during the coalition. Which political party said they don't want to look at what happened before the last election? It was Labor. And the 20 people in Labor voted no. Now, during the course of that day, Senator O'Neill stood inside the Australian Senate and basically said that she had created a separate inquiry at the Parliamentary Joint Committee of Corporations and Financial Services that very morning. Therefore, there was no need for two inquiries into ASIC. So just so we're clear, Senator O'Neill was positive towards an inquiry into ASIC in August. On the 13th of October, she said she doesn't believe in it. Then on the 27th of October, she did create an inquiry into ASIC using her committee. And then later that day, the Australian Senate, 43-20, voted to establish a second inquiry using Senator Bragg's committee. Now, you may want to ask yourself is, okay, so we have two inquiries happening at the moment. So what's the progress of those inquiries? Senator Bragg's inquiry has called for submissions. They gave the public 4 months, and submissions closed on the 28th of February. And now the inquiry is in the process of processing submissions, accepting them, and publishing them on the inquiry webpage. So while Senator Bragg's inquiry is moving forward, what's happened with Senator O'Neill's inquiry? So let's look at the next slide. So anyone can go onto the webpage of the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Corporations and Financial Services, controlled by Senator O'Neill. You will see that there's a reference to an inquiry into ASIC's capacity and capability to respond to reports of alleged misconduct. And you will see this critical line that's still published on the website today: the committee will call for written submissions in due course. It has been over 150 days since the establishment of the inquiry, and the inquiry has done nothing. The inquiry has not even called for submissions. So why has Senator O'Neill done this? Why did Senator O'Neill give me a positive signal in August? Why did Senator O'Neill then write to me on the 13th of October and say she doesn't support an inquiry? Why did Senator O'Neill establish an inquiry on the 27th of October, 2022? And here we are in March of 2023, and she's done absolutely nothing. Dare I say that this inquiry at the Parliamentary Joint Committee of Corporations Financial Services is a complete ruse. It's a fake inquiry. It was there purely done to prevent Senator Bragg from getting his inquiry into ASIC. And the question is why? Why would Senator O'Neill establish an inquiry into ASIC that was looking at things that ASIC did during the time of the coalition, and yet in 150 days, she has failed to act? Something deeper is happening inside ASIC. Now, that's not the end of the story. Starting in February of this year, at Senate estimates, Senator Bragg confronted ASIC about a secret investigation that happened into Deputy Chair Karen Chester. Now, in 2021, people in ASIC were highly concerned with the conduct of the Deputy Chair. They compiled a secret dossier on her. The former chairman, James Shipton, went to the Treasury with this dossier and said that the Deputy Chair is behaving in a way that's unprofessional and is quite alarming, and we want an investigation and removal of the Deputy Chair. The Treasury commenced an investigation into Deputy Chair Chester using an external law firm. The initial budget was $75,000. By the end of the investigation, it cost $180,000. Now, that report is still secret today. And again, this is a report into the Deputy Chair of ASIC of things that she did when the coalition was in power. So what happened on the 7th of March this year? Senator Bragg went into the Australian Senate. He moved in order for the production of documents, calling on the Treasury to hand over the investigation report, because this report is highly controversial. Because Karen Chester in February said that there was no adverse findings against her, but the report actually says that most of the allegations against her were either wholly or partially substantiated, but there was not enough that would rise to the standard of criminal misconduct. So that's why Treasury basically said there's nothing for them that they can do. They referred the report back to the chair of ASIC, Joseph Longo. He basically put it in the drawer and basically washed his hands of the whole matter, just like Pontius Pilate, and basically said it's all time to move on. So what happened when Senator Bragg moved the motion? The Senate voted 40-19 in favor of the Treasury handing over the report about Deputy Chair Chester of things that she did before the last election. And who were the 40 that voted for the release of the investigation report? The Coalition, the Greens, One Nation, UAP, and Jackie Lambie's party. And who voted against the release of the report? Labor. Again, a second major vote inside the Australian Senate about ASIC, about things that ASIC did before the last election when the coalition was in power, and yet the Labor Party doesn't want any of this to be released publicly. Having voted for the investigation report to be handed to the Australian Senate under an order for the production of documents, Labor did something interesting 2 days later. The Senate demanded that the Treasurer hand over the report at midday on the 9th of March. And so what did Labor do again? Labor refused to hand over the report, and they claimed a public interest immunity. They basically said that the release of this Treasury investigation report, which cost $180,000 of taxpayers' money, would be against the public interest. And they came up with all sorts of superfluous reasons for why they said it was against the public interest. Since the claim of public interest immunity by the Treasurer, we are all still in the dark in terms of the investigation report and in terms of which allegations were wholly or partially substantiated. Now, I have it on good authority that that's not the end of the matter, that this issue is going to come to a head some point soon in the next 1 to 2 months. So we'll see what happens in terms of whether we get the report or not. But the key paradox of this podcast is the following. Why has Labor on 2 occasions been the only political party to protect ASIC for things that happen at ASIC when the coalition was in power, and yet everyone else in the Senate, the coalition, Greens, One Nation, UAP, Jackie Lambie's party, and the independents, why are they pro-transparency? Why are they pro-investigation into ASIC? And yet, why is the Albanese Government and Labor anti-transparency, and they don't want the public to have their say about ASIC's performance? There is something profound happening inside the parliament. There are a lot of smart cookies who are looking at this situation and they can't figure it out. What's in it for Labor to protect ASIC for things that happened at ASIC before the last election? If you can solve this paradox, I would greatly encourage you to tell me the answer in the notes to this episode. Now, I suspect I have the answer. I suspect that in some time soon, I'm going to tell you what I think the answer is. But for now, if you can solve this paradox and you can solve one of the great political dilemmas of 2023 in federal politics, I would encourage you to tell us what the solution is. I'm John Adams, and I'm the Public Crusader.